Good day to everyone. I'm Crispin George. I'm a lecturer, Faculty of Information Systems and Technology, University of Sierra Leone. I'm also a doctoral candidate at the Atlantic International University, United States of America. The topic of this presentation is the essence of risk identification in project risk management, an overview. This presentation will follow the scores. We'll look at the introduction, planning for risk, project risk. We'll look at some of the factors we normally considered when identifying project risk. We'll also look at the risk identification techniques. We'll look at the project risk register, what it is, the factors considered in categorizing risk, risk response strategies, and then we conclude. When we talk of risk, risk cut across every discipline, and project management is not an exception. Every project activity carries some amount of risk, and risk, basically, these are uncertainties that could have positive or negative effects on our projects. According to L-2012, it refers to risk as an unexpected event or a condition that might have positive or negative effect on project objectives. So in essence, a risk can affect a project negatively, or it can affect it positively. And because risk has that tendency to affect project objectives, it is but necessary that we try to identify and isolate all possible risk, because we do not want a situation where as a result of this risk, we will be drifted away from what we want to achieve in these projects. Risk and uncertainties are closely intertwined terminologies. Most of the time we tend to use these two words interchangeably, but in actual fact the two terminologies differ. Risk in project management is characterized by its likelihood of occurring and its impact when it does occur. So these are some of the things we are scared of. The likelihood or the probability of a risk occurring, and when that risk does occur, what is the impact of that risk to our projects? So these are two important parameters that every project manager must carefully look at. Now, considering the effects risk normally has on our projects, it is but necessary for project staff or project team to take a careful look or to carefully plan for risk. Regardless of how severe the risk is, every possible risk must be identified, because there are times you might notice that a particular risk can be of no effect as at the time of identification, but as the project progresses, that risk can graduate from being a minor risk to a major risk. That is why it is necessary for us to identify all possible risk, and then when it comes to analyzing all these risks, we will be able to look at those risks that needs immediate interventions, or those risks that requires interventions that are not immediate. Now, in risk planning, the following measures should be taken by the project manager. Now, these are some of the things the project manager must try to do. The project manager must organize risk management meeting. This meeting is very, very much important because in this meeting, you are bringing in different stakeholders, and in bringing these different stakeholders, you will be able to identify all the risks associated with the project. And of course, the risks that have been identified in this your risk management meeting should be documented. Now, there are times most project managers, they tend to ignore this documentation aspect. They think they know it all. So there is no need for me to document. After all, I'll be able to recall. But that's not a good practice. Document every risk mentioned in the meeting. And also, responsibility should be assigned to project team managers. Individuals should be assigned in the management of this particular risk. And another important thing, stakeholders. Every important stakeholders, if possible, try to bring in all necessary stakeholders in this identification process, because risk is not only confined to the technical aspect of the project, but rather administrative risk should also be identified going forward. It will interest project team to know that most of the risk besetting projects are administrative. Therefore, more attention should be given in that regard. And another important factor is we should ensure that there is an effective risk management plan in the implementation process. Then, of course, we should be able to monitor and update risk, and then we should ensure that the risk management plan document is approved by the appropriate authorities. At the end of the day, once you've got this meeting, once you've documented all of these things, you've done all your analysis and everything, you should be able to come up with this document we call the RMP, the Risk Management Plan. And these documents should be forwarded for proper approval before you can start implementing some of the things that are in the document. Let's look at some of the factors we normally consider when identifying project risk. One, we want to broaden our information sources. The reason why we are broadening our information sources is because we want to capture sufficient risk that might endanger the project. Do not narrow your information sources. And another important thing is we want to be knowledgeable in identifying risk. This will help us to know the areas to consider in the risk identification process. And also we want to lay hands on all available risk identification tools. These tools, they are very much necessary, because the risk identification tools at your disposal, and even seek for more tools and techniques that you deem necessary for the process, because these are the tools that we are going to use in the identification process. We also want an effective and efficient risk identification process. And of course, we should document all identified risks. As I said earlier, never rely on your memory for recollection. Risk identification techniques. These are some of the techniques, but there are more. Interview is one of the techniques. Interview is a situation where the interviewer meets with the interviewee face to face. You discuss face to face. You have a chat, a face to face chat. This also is an important technique that helps to isolate, or that helps to identify hidden risk in the project. We also have what we call the Delphi method. The Delphi method, this is an estimation method. We are structured group of subject experts are given the opportunity to answer questions in 2 or more rounds, predetermined by a stop criterion. At the end of each round, the coordinator will deliver anonymous questions to each panelist to make a determination or judgment. However, during this process, the range of answers keep decreasing until the group meets at a particular answer, which is deemed to be the correct answer. That is what the Delphi method is all about. Then, of course, we have the SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. This one, of course, is a planning tool that we normally use in the evaluation of organizational strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. We have group discussion. Discussion, normally it can be a focus group discussion where you bring in participants, 8 to about 12 participants in a particular group, and then you begin to discuss. And in that discussion, you'll be able to bring out most of these hidden risks. Review of previous project document. That one is very much important because there are previous projects that have been implemented. By going through those documents, you will be able to isolate, or you'll be able to identify some of the risks that were encountered during that project. Diagramming techniques. These are all techniques you can use to explore risk identification. Expert opinion. Similar to this Delphi method, you can bring in experts because they know exactly what some of these things are. We have the project risk register. The project risk register, this is a tool normally used to document risk and provide suitable addressing method to reduce its impact if it occurs. One of the primary things we are focused on in risk identification is for us to be able to know the likelihood of this risk occurring and the impact this risk will have if it occurs in our project. So these are very important parameters that we normally consider. The project risk register normally follows this format. It's not exactly like this, but these are the major things that are captured in your project risk register. Of course, you give a particular ID to every risk. Then, of course, you try to the risk identified. You state the risk identified. Then you try to categorize the risk. You describe the risk. Then, of course, the causes, if there are causes. How are you going to respond to that risk? Or is the risk owner? The risk owner is like who is going to manage that particular risk. I told you earlier on that you should assign responsibilities to the project team. And of course, the status of the risk, this one you keep updating this one as the project progresses. Then, of course, the risk targets. Some of the uses of the project risk registers: it aids the flow of communication. It enables stakeholders to better understand the risk identification process. Of course, it enables us to know risk status. Remember, I told you about this risk status. This one, you keep updating this one as the project progresses. Of course, the risk register also helps us to better review, update, monitor, and control risk. Then, of course, it serves as a reference document for future projects. Remember, as I was saying just now, that when you are identifying risk, you'll have to go back again and review previous project documents. So once you have done this identification process in this particular project, it will serve as a reference or as a repository for subsequent projects. Plays a strategic role in making project decisions. Of course, once you have been able to identify this risk and this risk has been able to analyze, then management is in a better position to make a decision on this particular risk. Factors we normally consider in categorizing risk. Yes, we have 3 major factors that we normally consider. One of the factors is when the risk occurs. We want to know the timing of the risk, whether this risk will occur at the start of the project or at the middle of the project or at the end of the project. That one is very much important. We also want to know the impact, which aspect of the project this risk will impact. The objectives of the project this risk will impact, whether it will impact the cost of the project, whether it will impact the schedule of the project, whether it will impact the quality of the project, whether it will impact the scope of the project. These are all things we must consider in risk categorization. Then, of course, we'll also look at the performing organization. Let's take a look at some of the risk response strategies. There are several strategies. We have avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept, research, exploit, share, enhance. Remember, I told you that risk can have positive as well as negative effects on a particular project. And the avoid this involves taking action to either reduce the probability of the risk or its impact to zero. In either case, this response enables the risk to be circumvented entirely. So with the transfer now, here you are actually shifting the risk to a third party so that they are responsible for its management and impact. You are shifting the burden. To mitigate simply means you are trying to reduce the likelihood and the impact of the risk occurring. You try to minimize its impact. To accept normally we accept risks that are of low likelihood and low impact of occurring. Some of these risks, you just manage them. You do not take any drastic measures to curb this kind of risk. So you accept them and then you allow the project to go on. But when accepting risk, you should be mindful. You should always try to keep monitoring that risk because, as I said, some risk can migrate. Then, of course, we have research. This talks of learning more about the risk. Exploit here. You are using more organizational resources in order to get the project completed on time with reduced cost. Then, of course, share here, you bring third party. And, of course, we have what we call enhance. But research, exploits, share, and enhance, normally we use these strategies for risk that will have positive effect on the project, whereas the avoid, transfer, mitigate, and accept, we use it for risk that will have negative effect. Thanks for your attention.